I'd like to turn it over to Michael Margulies now, and he'll talk a little bit about the house itself.
Thanks, Don. Good morning, everybody. All right, so architecturally, you kind of got the gist that it was owned by one family in 1759 and then it was confiscated. So at the time of the confiscation, that was a huge economic shift to the United States of America. That was the point where a whole bunch of people that basically didn't have resources all of a sudden got resources. And a place like this got sold for very little. Eventually went into other hands of people. It was rented for a little while. Someone eventually got it, converted it into a bigger farm. So the idea here is that eventually someone started putting on additions to it because they had the resources to do that. They didn't pay that much for it. So come about 1830, it was sold to someone who started renovating. So they put up a barn, they put up all these additions to the house. It no longer quite looked like the 1759 house. Fast forward into the early 20th century, people started putting more additions on the house. Probably we're figuring around 1930, something like that. That wing over there that's kind of white kind of got knocked down, redone, and that's the lean-to you kind of see now. That front porch went on that you can all see in the handout. So at that time, the 1759 house was pretty much obscure. You couldn't really see what the core of the house was. So the question moving forward was, what do you now do when the nonprofit got it? How do you interpret this resource? How do you show everybody the history, like architecture? Like you can hear Don, but how do you look at the house really quickly and get that story? So the thing was, they had done some studies on the property and said this was significant circa 1759 when it was built to circa 1900. So it was this very vague timeline of what the significance of this house was because it continued to be a farm the entire time. So the real argument we had to do was, we had to say, we want to restore this to a certain period so that you can really understand it. So we went to Trenton and we said, all right, we don't want to restore this to like 1930 or something like that. We don't want to even restore it to the 1830. We want to restore it to 1759. Now this is a very strange thing to do today because you want to save everything because 1830, that's a significant, that has some history to it, but we were arguing that that did not have the history of the Vought family. So we really wanted to restore this to the period of the Vought occupancy, or at least so it looked like it did when the Voughts lived here, so that we could tell the story and the story kind of matched the architecture. So, that being said, we got the approvals to do that, and that was the first round, was to take off the front porch and the handouts that you got. So, that was the first time that you could actually see that the core of the house was what you see now. The stone portion that you see is the core 1759 wing. That was originally built, except there was a porch, you can see right here, it jutted out, and the grade was just about here. Like the earth came up to about this level, so it was a little higher. There was a little staircase that came up to the front porch. The wing on the back was the 1830 wing, and what they had done in 1830 is they built that out of stone also. So they took apart the roof of the 1759 house, raised the roof on the 1830s portion, and connected it all together. But it was really weird, really awkward. So what they did then is they parged the entire building. They put stucco over it, so it kind of uniformly made it all look like a big white mass, which was actually the fashion of the time in the mid-19th century anyway. And what we did when we started taking it apart, we're not actually demolishing things. What we're doing is called deconstructing, because we want to find that evolution. We want to justify all the things we're doing along the way. So as we started deconstructing the 1830s roof to try to restore the 1759 configuration, what we found is a whole bunch of evidence. So the big piece of wood that they put all across the 1830s wing was the roof that they had taken off of the 1759 wing. So now we had all the pieces to the original building, and all we did is put that back. We also found in a hole, when they had re-roofed the house in 1830, they took all the shingles from 1759 and the cutoffs from what they were building in 1830 and dumped it down into like a hole in the roof that no one was ever going to see again. So we pulled out the original shingles from 1759 and all the cutoffs from 1830. So then we too had the justification and the whole chronology of how the roof went together. So all of that is what justified us in restoring the roof to what you see today, which is a wood-shake roof. So our next goal was really to try to get the whole thing, we got it weather tight by the roof. And let me back up, because when we got the property, when the nonprofit got it, there were holes in the roof and the water was coming in, and there were garbage cans in the roof collecting the water on the attic. So we were collecting the water, dumping it out windows and everything like that. And what we had to do is, we had to protect something on the inside, which is very rare. One of the reasons this building was protected and saved was because of the plaster work that's inside. The plaster ceilings in here are a Baroque plaster work that you rarely see. So there are these patterns, and we'll take tours, I think, of like a handful of people at a time through it. So the patterns are some sort of like wavy lines, basically, of plaster built up on plaster ceilings that are patterns in all the rooms. And in the center hallway, the pattern is a snake, a serpent going down the hallway. It spirals up to the head that looks at the front door. So really interesting, really unique, nothing that we'd ever seen before, and that was one of the key reasons why we were able to quickly save the house when it was slated for demolition. So the goal was how architecturally, without a whole lot of money as the nonprofit's getting born, how do you save this? Well, the roof was the first job. So that's why we put on the wood shake roof immediately and did the justification back to 1759. The next goal was to start to indicate what the front looked like. So we took off that front porch that was put on around 1930s era, and we started to uncover what was here. So we were taking off some of the stucco that was on the outside to show the 1759 stonework. And at that time, you can kind of see up here where there's a single window, there were double windows. In the 1930s, they had widened all the windows, and these were really awkward looking. So we had to take out the 1930s windows, reconstruct the stonework back to the openings of 1759. And we had all of that evidence as well, because the heads of the windows, as you can see, are arches. So the arches start and stop, so we knew exactly how wide the window was, and we knew exactly how high the window was. And we could figure out that about that time, the glass size was about 8 by 10, the pane sizes. So if you use that and you kind of work backwards, we could figure out what the pattern was of the windows, and then figure out what the frame was like in the windows. So our goal was to try to reconstruct that and start to make the building watertight and show what the front looked like. Luckily, at the time, we had Hurricane Sandy, right? Luckily. Unfortunately, Hurricane Sandy took down one of the barns on the property that the school still owned. But what it also did is it knocked down a forest of white oak trees. And the person who had the white oak trees sold it to the group for very little. And we were able to store the white oak trees, which white oak was a rather rot-resistant material that we used basically for the window frames. And the thing is, these window frames, if anyone's seen like a barn raising, you know how a barn goes together with timber frame and then you raise the barn? That's how these windows were constructed. The windows are essentially timber frame pieces that you would raise up as you're building the masonry, and it's integral with the building. So we got this white oak, we milled it, and we let it dry here for about a year. And then we used that to reconstruct the window bucks, they call it, and the door buck. So that's what you can see up there. And it's basically like a timber that wraps in like a U shape with a sill at the bottom, and then a back band or a trim around it. And then the sashes we got made, and the sashes just pop right into those windows. This one we did not get sashes made. This is kind of like we had some extra wood left over, so we were able to make a frame. So it kind of shows the evolution. And we also made the front door at the time. So the front door has the same thing. It's like a buck that goes in a U shape with a windowsill. So that was just completed over the course of the pandemic. I think we were resolving that, so we're just about done with that now. So the next goal that we're working on is going to be the plaster. So the plaster, as I said, was one of the key focuses of this. We'll show everyone when we go in there. So the idea is, how do you fix the plaster? Now, one of the rooms, which you'll see, was completely destroyed in 1930 when they put in the bathroom. What they did is they took out the entire room and put the bathroom in, including the ceiling. So we don't know what it looked like. We're assuming that you may even be standing on it, because in 1930 this got built up a little bit when they carved all this down. So this may have been a scrapyard. Hopefully in the future we do some sort of archaeological survey and we can figure out what's in here. But 3 of the other rooms still have the Baroque plasterwork on it, and the hallway is still intact with the serpent. And they're all in various states of either collapse, disrepair, or cracking. So we have to figure out the different stages to try to figure out how to fix this, basically, a treatment approach. So that's our next goal. And we also have Rob Wozniak, who's in the back. He's going to work with us, hopefully, who is Preservation Works. So he's going to be our plaster expert. And what we'll do is we'll either walk through with him, or when I'm walking through, he can talk about plaster outside and describe the reason we're doing this. And there was a whole way to do plaster back then that people don't understand now, plaster and masonry. So it's a big misconception, I think, now. When people get old houses and they try to fix plaster, or they try to fix stonework, that they kind of go to Home Depot and get a bagged mix of mortar or something like that, I mean, it's not appropriate. It's something that will actually destroy your building. So we try to, as much as possible, teach people, educate them on the proper ways to do masonry restoration and plaster. So I think that's all I have to say. Do you want me to? Do you want to start tours now? Or?
Yeah, let's start tours.